The room went completely silent the moment my son looked straight into my eyes and said, "Dad, you're 71 years old, you can't take care of yourself anymore. This house isn't really yours now. It's time for you to leave." For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. I looked past him toward the dining room window I had installed with my own hands 26 years earlier. Every brick in that house carried a memory. Every crack in the wooden floor reminded me of another overtime shift, another paycheck saved instead of spent. Then my son picked up the 2 suitcases, sitting beside the front door. "I already packed everything you'll need." Everything. 38 years of marriage, 44 years of work, thousands of family dinners, hundreds of birthdays. Reduced to 2 suitcases. My daughter-in-law stood behind him with her arms folded across her chest. She never smiled. She simply waited. When I didn't move, my son sighed the way exhausted parents sometimes sigh at stubborn children. "Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder. That word echoed inside my head. Not because it hurt. Because I suddenly realized something. He actually believed he was doing the responsible thing. He truly believed I had become the problem. I slowly reached for the handle of the first suitcase. It felt strangely light. He had packed clothes. A few photographs. My medications. Nothing else. No old journals. No workshop keys. No safe documents. No family records. No metal box from my office. Interesting. Very interesting. I looked at him one last time. "You checked every room." He nodded confidently. "Every single one." "I see." He waited for me to argue. To cry. To remind him that I had paid every mortgage payment for 28 years. Instead, I simply smiled. Not because I had accepted defeat. Because I had just confirmed something important. There was one place he had never thought to look. And what rested there would change everything. But this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Before we go any further, drop your first name and the city you're watching from in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach around the world. And if stories about quiet justice, family, and unexpected consequences mean something to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 71 years old. Most people meeting me today assume I've always been quiet. That's not true. Life simply teaches some people that silence often carries more weight than shouting. I grew up in a small manufacturing town where nearly every family depended on the same steel plant. My father worked there for 43 years. My mother cleaned offices every evening after taking care of 3 children during the day. Money was never enough. When I was 11 years old, I wanted a new baseball glove. My father placed his rough hand on my shoulder and said something I never forgot. "Harold, if something matters enough, you don't wish for it, you work for it." So I spent the entire summer mowing lawns. 32 different houses. $5 each. I still remember counting every dollar on my bedroom floor before finally buying that glove. It wasn't really about baseball. It was about ownership. Something earned always feels different from something given. That lesson shaped every major decision I ever made. By 22, I had completed an apprenticeship as an electrical technician. By 26, I supervised 12 workers. At 31, I became operations manager for one of the fastest-growing manufacturing companies in the county. People assume promotions happen because someone is lucky. They don't see the 14-hour shifts. The weekends missed. The vacations cancelled. The birthdays attended through video calls because another production line had failed. I wasn't building a career. I was building stability. When my wife, Margaret, became pregnant with our only son, Daniel, I promised myself something. He would never know what it felt like to choose between groceries and electricity. He wouldn't wear patched shoes. He wouldn't skip school trips because we couldn't afford them. He would have opportunities I never imagined. Promises like that sound beautiful. until they become expensive. By the time Daniel turned 18, Margaret and I had spent enough on his education, sports, music lessons, and college savings to purchase another small house. We never regretted it. Not once. At least. Not then. Daniel was a bright child. Curious. Funny. Sensitive. If another student was bullied, Daniel defended them. If an elderly neighbor struggled with groceries, Daniel carried them inside without being asked. Looking back now, I don't believe he was born selfish. People rarely are. Life changes people slowly. One compromise at a time. One excuse at a time. One convenience at a time. Until they barely recognized themselves. There was one memory that returned to me often after everything happened. I was 38. Daniel was 9. I had spent almost 6 months building a treehouse in our backyard. Every Saturday. Every Sunday. Every spare afternoon. One evening, a neighborhood boy walked over and announced that the treehouse belonged to everyone because it stood high enough for all the children to use. Daniel immediately answered. No. The other boy frowned. Why not? Because my dad built it. Those words made me smile. Not because he was selfish. Because he understood effort. He understood that work creates value. Or at least, I thought he did. Years passed. Margaret became a school librarian. She loved helping children discover books they never expected to enjoy. She remembered every student's favorite author. Every birthday. Every family situation. People adored her. When cancer entered our lives, it did so quietly. Fatigue first. Then appointments. Then treatments. Then surgeries. Then hope. Then disappointment. She fought for 3 years. 3 years and 4 months. Long enough to watch our first granddaughter start kindergarten. Long enough to celebrate our 40th anniversary from a hospital room. Long enough to tell me one sentence I still hear every morning. Promise me you'll keep living after I'm gone. I promised. I meant it. She passed away on a rainy Tuesday morning. The house became impossibly quiet. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the absence of one particular voice. The one your ears keep searching for. For almost 2 years, I learned how to live alone. I joined a woodworking club. Volunteered twice a week repairing wheelchairs for veterans. Started walking 3 miles every morning. Cooked my own meals. Paid every bill. Maintained the yard myself. I wasn't surviving. I was living. Daniel visited less often than before. I understood. He had work. Children. Responsibilities. Life moves quickly when you're raising a family. At least. That's what I kept telling myself. Then came the conversations. Small ones. Harmless on the surface. Dad, are you sure you should still be climbing ladders? Dad, maybe someone else should manage your finances. Dad, that neighborhood isn't what it used to be. Dad, have you thought about downsizing? Individually, each question sounded reasonable. Together, they formed a pattern. I noticed. I just didn't respond. One afternoon, while fixing a loose fence panel, my neighbor Frank wandered over carrying 2 cups of coffee. Frank had lived across the street for 19 years. He observed everything. Without gossip. Without judgment. Just observation. He handed me a cup. You know your son stopped by yesterday. I nodded. He mentioned helping me organize some paperwork. Frank hesitated. Didn't sound like paperwork. What did it sound like? Frank stared toward my garage. Like planning. I looked at him carefully. What kind of planning? He shrugged. The kind where people measure rooms. I didn't answer. Instead, I took another sip of coffee and watched two sparrows fighting over breadcrumbs in the driveway. Sometimes birds explain human behavior better than people do. One bird always believes the crumbs belong only to him, until another bird reminds him they don't. That evening, Daniel called. Dad, Emily and I were thinking maybe we should spend more time helping you. Helping. Another interesting word. I thanked him. Because gratitude costs nothing. And because I wanted to hear what came next. He continued. We've been discussing the future. The future. People often use that word when they're uncomfortable talking about the present. I asked him exactly one question. What future? There was a long pause. Then he laughed. Oh, nothing serious. Whenever someone says nothing serious, it usually means the opposite. I made a quiet decision that night. I would start paying closer attention. Not because I distrusted my son. Because experience had taught me that major changes rarely arrive without small warnings first. And over the next several weeks, the warnings became impossible to ignore. The first warning arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Daniel showed up without calling first. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that he wasn't carrying groceries, coffee, or a fishing rod the way he often had in the past. He was carrying a leather folder. Working on something, I asked as I opened the door. Just a few papers. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile people wear before asking for something uncomfortable. I invited him inside. He walked slowly through the living room, looking around longer than necessary. His eyes paused on the grandfather clock. The fireplace. The staircase. The kitchen. He wasn't remembering the house. He was evaluating it. You've kept the place in great shape, he said. I've tried. He nodded. You know, houses around here are selling for almost $600,000 now. I looked at him. I didn't know you were following the market. He shrugged. Just curious. No, not curious. Interested. There is a difference. After a few minutes of small talk, he opened the leather folder. I've been reading about estate planning. There it was. The real reason for the visit. I poured us both another cup of coffee before answering. Estate planning is important. I'm glad you think so. I didn't say I was planning to change anything. His fingers stopped moving. For the first time that afternoon, he looked uncomfortable. I just mean if something ever happened. If something happens, my attorney already knows what to do. He blinked. You have an attorney. I've had the same attorney for 23 years. He forced another smile. Though, that tiny word told me far more than any long conversation could have. He hadn't expected that answer. He had assumed I was simply an old man, paying bills and watching television every day. He didn't know that after Margaret passed away, I had reviewed every financial document I owned. Every account. Every investment. Every insurance policy. Every property record. Not because I expected trouble. Because responsibility doesn't end when your spouse dies. It becomes even more important. Daniel changed the subject quickly. So, have you thought about moving closer to us? I like this neighborhood. It would be easier. For whom? The question escaped before I could soften it. He hesitated. For everyone. Everyone. Another interesting word. Whenever people avoid saying exactly who benefits, they often say everyone. He stayed another hour. We talked about baseball. His daughters. The weather. But the conversation never felt natural again. Something invisible had entered the room. Expectation. A week later, my granddaughter Sophie called. She was 16. Bright. Honest. Far too honest, actually. Grandpa. Hi, sweetheart. Can I ask you something? Always. She lowered her voice. Are you really selling your house? My hand froze halfway to the coffee mug. What makes you think that? Dad and Mom have been talking about where they'll put their office after they move in. Silence. Children rarely realize how much truth they accidentally reveal. Sophie. They told me not to say anything. I understand. Grandpa. Yes. You're not moving because you're sick, are you? I smiled even though she couldn't see it. No, sweetheart. Good. She sighed with relief. I like your house. So do I. After hanging up, I stood in the kitchen for nearly 15 minutes. Not angry. Thinking. Margaret used to tell me that people reveal themselves long before they realize they're being watched. She was right. Daniel and Emily weren't discussing possibilities anymore. In their minds, the decision had already been made. The only person who hadn't agreed was me. Over the next month, the visits became more frequent. Emily suddenly wanted to help organize closets. Daniel offered to clean the garage. They volunteered to sort old paperwork. Every offer sounded generous. Every offer involved searching through my belongings. I politely declined each one. I enjoy doing these things myself. Emily's smile became tighter every time she heard that sentence. One Sunday afternoon, she finally asked directly, Harold, don't you trust us? I answered without hesitation. I trust actions much more than words. She laughed awkwardly. Daniel quickly changed the subject. But I noticed the look they exchanged. A look that lasted less than 2 seconds. Yet it said everything. Plans delayed. Not abandoned. 3 days later, I visited my attorney. His name was Charles Whitmore. We had known each other for almost 3 decades. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't emotional. He simply paid attention. After reviewing a few documents, he leaned back in his chair. You look troubled. I've noticed something. What kind of something? My son seems very interested in my house. Charles folded his hands. Interested financially? I believe so. He nodded slowly. Have you changed your will recently? No. Would you like to? I looked out his office window. Cars moved through downtown traffic as though everyone knew exactly where they were going. Life has a funny way of making certainty look effortless. I don't want to punish anyone, I finally said. Charles smiled faintly. Good. I looked at him. Good. People make their worst decisions when they're trying to punish someone. He opened another folder. But protecting yourself. He tapped the paperwork. Is different. We spent nearly 3 hours reviewing everything. Not changing it. Reviewing it. Understanding it. Clarifying every possibility. When I left his office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Peace. Not because I expected conflict. Because preparation removes fear. That evening I stopped by the cemetery. Margaret always loved fresh white lilies. I placed 6 of them beside her headstone. I think something's changing, I whispered. The wind moved softly through the trees. I hope I'm wrong. I stood there for a long time. People often ask whether talking to someone who has passed away feels strange. Not to me. Love doesn't disappear because conversations become one-sided. Before leaving, I remembered something Margaret had once told Daniel when he was only 12 years old. He had wanted to quit piano lessons after 2 difficult weeks. It's easy to make decisions when everything feels comfortable, she told him. Character appears when comfort disappears. At the time, he rolled his eyes. Like most 12-year-olds. Standing there beside her grave. I wondered whether either of us had truly understood that lesson back then. 2 weeks later, Daniel invited me to dinner. Emily cooked my favorite roast. The girls were unusually quiet. The table was set perfectly. Everything looked almost planned. Halfway through dessert, Daniel cleared his throat. Dad, there it was. The tone people use before changing someone's life. Emily reached for a folder resting beside her chair. My eyes settled on it immediately. Paperwork. Again. Daniel smiled. We've come up with an idea that could really help everyone. I placed my fork gently on the plate. I'm listening. He slid the folder across the table. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I looked at my son, the little boy who had once proudly told another child. My dad built it. And for the first time in my life, I wondered whether he still remembered those words. I rested my hand on the folder but didn't open it. Paper has an interesting quality. It never lies. People do. Paper simply records whatever someone wanted it to record. Daniel leaned forward. I know this might seem sudden. It usually is, I replied quietly. Emily forced a pleasant smile. We've been thinking about what's best for the future. Again, the future. Always the future. Never today. Never tomorrow morning. Always some distant version of life that somehow required immediate decisions. I opened the folder. The first page contained diagrams of my house. Measurements, room labels, garage dimensions, even notes about remodeling the upstairs bathroom. I slowly turned another page. Then another. Contractor estimates, furniture layouts, mortgage calculations. None of them included my name except where ownership was mentioned. I looked up. You've done a lot of planning. Daniel smiled as though I had complimented him. We wanted to be prepared. Prepared. For my death. For my departure. For my surrender. I couldn't tell. Emily finally spoke. The girls need more space. They're growing. I know. And your house has everything. It does. So, she hesitated just long enough to sound polite. We thought you could move into one of those wonderful retirement communities. I nodded once. I've visited a few. Daniel brightened. Really? Yes. What did you think? They're perfect for people who choose them. The smile disappeared from his face. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. Silence settled over the dining room. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly enough to fill the entire house. Finally Daniel sighed. Dad, no, I haven't even explained. You don't need to. Emily crossed her arms. I think you're being unfair. I've listened without interrupting. She looked away. People often confuse disagreement with disrespect. They aren't the same thing. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. I'm staying in my home. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Can you at least think about it? I already have. And my answer is still no. No shouting. No accusations. No dramatic exit. Just one word. No. The drive home felt longer than usual. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Margaret loved rainy evenings. She used to say rain gave people permission to slow down. That night I didn't turn on the television. Instead I sat in my workshop behind the house. The smell of cedar and pine always reminded me why I enjoyed building things. Wood never pretends. If you cut it carelessly, it shows. If you treat it patiently, it rewards you. People are much harder to understand. While organizing a cabinet, I noticed something missing. Not stolen. Moved. A small lockbox had been shifted nearly 6 inches from where I always kept it. Most people would never notice. I did. When you spend 40 years measuring electrical panels down to fractions of an inch, you notice small changes. Someone had been inside my workshop. Nothing appeared missing, but someone had searched. I quietly put everything back exactly where it belonged. Then I smiled. Whoever had looked hadn't found what they wanted. The following Sunday, Frank waved me over while I was trimming the hedges. You got a minute? Always. He lowered his voice. I don't like getting involved. I know. But I saw a realtor walking around your property yesterday. I frowned. A realtor. He was taking notes. Did he knock? No. He walked around with your son. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Frank finally added, I figured you should know. I thanked him. That evening I called Daniel. Did you visit my house yesterday? Yeah. Were you alone? A pause. Emily came. Anyone else? Another pause. No. He lied. Not a clever lie. Not a convincing one. Just a lie. I decided not to challenge him. Sometimes the second lie tells you more than the first. Over the next month, our conversations became shorter. Birthdays, holiday plannings, quick phone calls, surface-level conversations. Underneath them, something had changed forever. Trust doesn't usually disappear all at once. It leaves quietly. One disappointment at a time. One hidden conversation at a time. One unnecessary lie at a time. Then came the morning everything finally broke. It was a Tuesday. 9:17 a.m. I remember the exact time because I had just finished paying my quarterly property taxes online. The doorbell rang. Daniel, Emily, a moving truck. For a brief moment, I actually wondered if they had come to help someone else on the street. Then I noticed the empty boxes stacked in the truck. My stomach tightened. Daniel smiled nervously. Dad, what are you doing here? We need to talk. You should have called. It couldn't wait. Emily stepped forward holding another folder. Always another folder. Always another document. Never another conversation. We've already arranged everything. My eyes moved from the truck. To the boxes. To my son. What exactly have you arranged? He took a deep breath. We think it's time. Time. Such a harmless word. Such a dangerous one. I unlocked the front door and let them inside. Neither of them looked around like guests. They walked through the hallway like people imagining where their furniture would go. I noticed. I said nothing. Because by then, I had already started preparing for whatever came next. And neither of them had the slightest idea how prepared I really was. Daniel placed the folder on my kitchen table as though it already belonged there. Emily stood beside the window, looking out over the backyard where the old maple tree still stretched its branches across the fence. Margaret had planted that tree the year Daniel started first grade. It was barely taller than him back then. Now it towered over the roof. Funny how trees understand patience better than people. Dad, Daniel began carefully, please just hear us out. I've been hearing you out for months. This is different. No, I said quietly, it's really not. He opened the folder. Several printed pages. A brochure for an assisted living community. Financial comparisons. Estimated home values. Monthly expenses. Someone had spent a great deal of time preparing a presentation. Not about my life. About my assets. Emily pointed at one page. Look at this place. I glanced down. Private dinings. Game nights. Transportation. Medical staff. Beautiful photographs. It looks very nice, I admitted. It is. But I don't live there. You could. I don't want to. Daniel leaned forward. You've been alone for almost 3 years. I know exactly how long it's been. His expression softened. We're worried. No, I answered. You're planning. The room became quiet. Neither of them denied it. That silence was answer enough. Emily finally spoke. You make it sound selfish. I'm saying it sounds organized. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. We've already talked to a financial advisor. I didn't ask you to. We're trying to protect everyone. There it is again. What? Everyone? I looked directly at him. Tell me exactly who benefits if I leave this house. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked toward Emily, then back at me. We all do. I nodded slowly. Thank you. For what? For finally answering honestly. The conversation lasted another hour. Not once did anyone raise their voice. That almost made it sadder. People imagine family conflicts exploding into shouting matches. Real heartbreak is often much quieter. It sounds like polite voices discussing things that should never have become negotiations. When they finally left, Daniel hugged me. His hug felt different. Not cold. Not warm. Careful. As though he believed I was becoming fragile. I watched their car disappear around the corner. Then I walked into my workshop. I unlocked a cabinet hidden behind an old shelving unit. Inside sat a weathered metal document case. Margaret used to joke that I treated it better than my truck. Maybe she was right. Inside were copies of every important record from the past 30 years. Property documents, insurance files, investment statements, letters, receipts, and one sealed envelope with instructions that had never been opened. I looked at it for a long moment, then locked everything away again. Not yet. 3 weeks passed peacefully. Almost too peacefully. Daniel called more often. Emily sent friendly messages. Sophie's birthday party came and went without incident. For a brief moment, I wondered if perhaps they had accepted my decision. Then, on a Wednesday morning, my bank called. Mr. Bennett. Speaking. This is Angela from First County Bank. Good morning. We noticed an unusual inquiry regarding your home equity account. My heart remained calm. What kind of inquiry? Someone requested information about ownership verification. I didn't authorize that. I assumed as much. Who made the request? I'm afraid I can't disclose names over the phone. That's all right. But I strongly recommend reviewing your account activity. After hanging up, I didn't panic. Panic clouds judgment. Instead, I drove straight to the bank. An hour later, everything became much clearer. Someone had been asking questions they had no reason to ask. No money had been taken. No signatures had been forged. Not yet. But someone had been gathering information. Preparation. Again. Always preparation. That afternoon I visited Charles. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his glasses and placed them on his desk. I have a question. Go ahead. If someone believed they were eventually entitled to your property, they might become impatient. He nodded. And impatient people often convince themselves they're only speeding up the inevitable. I stared at the bookshelf behind him. So what do I do? Charles smiled slightly. You continue being exactly who you've always been. And what's that? Prepared. He opened another file. I'd also like to put a few additional safeguards in place. We spent another 2 hours reviewing documents. Not because I expected disaster. Because preparation is cheaper than regret. When I left his office, Charles walked me to the elevator. Just before the doors closed, he said one sentence. Harold, yes, if anyone ever pressures you inside your own home. He paused. Remember that being family doesn't give them authority. The elevator doors closed. I carried those words with me all the way home. A few days later, Sophie stopped by unexpectedly. She found me repairing an old rocking chair in the garage. Grandpa, come in. She watched me sand one of the wooden arms. Can I ask something? You always can. She hesitated. Why are Mom and Dad always talking about your house? I stopped working. What have you heard? They keep saying they'll finally have enough space. She looked embarrassed. I don't think they know I hear them. Children hear far more than adults realize. They love you, I said carefully. I know. But, she looked down at the garage floor. I don't think they're listening to you anymore. Those words stayed with me long after she left. Because they came from the only person in the family who wasn't trying to win anything. Only trying to understand. And sometimes, the quietest voice in the room is the one closest to the truth. I had no idea that within a matter of weeks, Daniel would stop asking me to leave. And start acting as though the decision had already been made. It began so subtly that, if I hadn't spent a lifetime noticing details, I might have missed it. The first clue was my mailbox. For 32 years, every piece of mail had arrived with one simple name. Harold Bennett. One Monday morning, mixed between utility bills and advertisements, I found a flyer addressed to the Bennett family. Not unusual by itself. But 3 days later, another envelope arrived. This one read, Current resident Daniel Bennett. I stared at it for several seconds. Someone somewhere had started connecting my address with my son's name. Accident. Maybe not. I placed the envelope inside a folder instead of throwing it away. Experience had taught me something valuable. Small facts become important when enough of them begin pointing in the same direction. The following Saturday, Daniel invited himself over. He walked through the house carrying a tape measure. I thought I'd help you plan a few renovations. I didn't ask for renovations. They'll increase the property's value. I don't intend to sell. You never know. He stretched the tape measure across the living room. 21 feet. Then the dining room. Then the guest bedroom. I watched quietly. Finally I asked, Daniel, yes, whose furniture are you measuring for? His hands froze. Only for a moment. Then he laughed. Dad, you're overthinking. Maybe, but people don't accidentally measure rooms. Emily arrived an hour later carrying coffee. She walked straight into the kitchen as comfortably as Margaret once had. I've been thinking, she said, about the upstairs could become a beautiful master suite. I looked toward the staircase. I already have a master bedroom. She smiled politely. I mean eventually. Eventually. There was that word again. A future that somehow required planning today. I nodded without answering. Silence often encourages people to keep talking. Emily did exactly that. The girls could each have their own rooms. Daniel added, and we'd finally have enough space for everyone during holidays. Everyone. Again. I wondered whether they even realized how often they used that word. To them it sounded generous. To me it sounded like ownership. Later that evening after they left, I sat on the back porch watching the sunset. Margaret loved sunsets. She used to stop whatever she was doing and simply watch the sky change colors. I never understood why. Not until after she was gone. When someone you love disappears, you begin appreciating things that don't last. Sunset. Conversations. Ordinary Tuesdays. A familiar laugh. Nothing feels ordinary anymore. Frank walked across the lawn carrying 2 bottles of lemonade. You looked deep in thought. I was. He handed me 1 bottle. I saw Daniel measuring your house. So did I. Frank frowned. I hope I'm wrong. So do I. But I've seen families destroy themselves over less. I nodded slowly. So have I. He looked toward my garage. You're still keeping busy. Every day. What are you building now? A rocking horse. For one of the veterans. No. I smiled. For someone who still understands the difference between earning something and expecting it. Frank looked at me for a long moment. Then he simply nodded. He didn't ask another question. Good friends know when explanations aren't necessary. 2 weeks later, my phone rang just after breakfast. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Mr. Bennett. Speaking. My name is Linda. I'm calling from Green Meadows Senior Living. I frowned. Yes. We're following up regarding your upcoming tour. My what? The appointment scheduled for next Tuesday. I stood completely still. I'm afraid there's been a mistake. The woman sounded confused. We received your completed information form. I never filled one out. Silence. I'm very sorry. Could you tell me who submitted it? I'm not permitted to discuss that. I understand. But I can assure you. I spoke gently. As I won't be attending. When the call ended, I didn't feel angry. I felt disappointed. Someone hadn't simply discussed retirement. Someone had started making arrangements without my knowledge. That crossed a line. That afternoon I drove nowhere in particular. Sometimes movement helps organize thoughts. I eventually found myself parked outside the little church, where Margaret and I had renewed our wedding vows on our 25th anniversary. The building looked exactly the same. Same red brick. Same white doors. Same bell tower. Time changes people faster than places. I sat there remembering the promise we had made. Not to agree on everything. Not to avoid hardship. Simply to remain partners. Partnership. Such a simple word. It requires listening. Without listening, it becomes management. And I was beginning to realize that Daniel no longer saw me as his father. He saw me as a responsibility to organize. A problem to solve. An obstacle to move. That realization hurt more than anything he had actually said. Because it hadn't happened overnight. It had happened one small decision at a time. One assumption after another. One conversation where my opinion mattered a little less. Until one day. It barely mattered at all. I looked at the empty passenger seat where Margaret used to sit. I hope I'm handling this the way you would have. The car remained silent. But somehow, I already knew the answer. Margaret never confused kindness with surrender. Neither would I. And before that month was over, my son would make the biggest mistake of his entire life. Not because he underestimated my money. Not because he underestimated the law. Because he underestimated something much more important. The man who had spent 50 years quietly preparing for every storm life could bring. The mistake began on an ordinary Friday. Nothing dramatic. No shouting. No threats. Just a phone call. Dad, Daniel said cheerfully, Emily and I are taking the girls out tomorrow. Want to come over for dinner tonight instead? I'd like that. Great, around 6. I'll be there. His voice sounded relaxed. Almost relieved. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe things might finally be settling down. Maybe all the strange conversations were behind us. Maybe we had simply misunderstood one another. Hope has a quiet way of returning when you least expect it. Dinner was pleasant. Too pleasant. Emily laughed more than usual. Daniel asked about my woodworking projects. The girls talked excitedly about school. Even Sophie seemed more relaxed. If someone had walked into the room that evening, they would have seen an ordinary family sharing an ordinary meal. But experience had taught me something. Sometimes people become unusually kind immediately before asking for something difficult. Sure enough, as dessert plates were being cleared away, Daniel looked toward Emily. She gave the smallest nod. He turned back to me. Dad, there it was. Again. I've been thinking. I'm listening. I really believe you'd be happier somewhere with people your own age. I have neighbors. I mean professionally cared for. I don't need professional care. You might someday. Someday isn't today. Emily folded her hands together. We're only trying to avoid a crisis. I smiled gently. You don't prevent tomorrow by taking away today. Neither of them answered. The conversation drifted elsewhere. But I noticed something. Daniel wasn't disappointed. He was impatient. Those are very different emotions. The next morning I returned home from my usual 3-mile walk. The front gate stood slightly open. I always closed it. Always. The back door was locked. Nothing appeared disturbed. Still, something felt different. Years of troubleshooting electrical systems had trained my instincts. When something feels wrong, you don't ignore it simply because everything appears normal. I walked room by room. Living room, dining room, kitchen, bedroom, office. Everything looked untouched. Until I reached the study. One drawer wasn't completely closed. Only about half an inch. Someone else would never have noticed. I did. Inside were old tax records. Insurance papers. Nothing missing. Just rearranged. I quietly closed the drawer. Then I walked into the workshop. The hidden cabinet remained locked. Exactly as I had left it. I let out a slow breath. Whoever had searched the house hadn't found what mattered. That afternoon I installed something I had been considering for months. A discreet security camera overlooking the front entrance. Another facing the driveway. Not because I expected danger. Because certainty is worth more than suspicion. If nothing happened, wonderful. If something did, questions would become answers. 3 days later the answers arrived. At 2:14 in the afternoon, while volunteering at the Veterans Workshop, my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I opened the security app. Daniel, Emily, standing on my front porch. Neither of them had called. Neither of them had told me they were stopping by. I watched silently. Daniel removed a key from his pocket. A key. My stomach tightened. He unlocked the front door. They walked inside. For nearly 35 minutes. Room after room. Cabinets. Closets. Garage. They weren't visiting. They were searching. Then they left. Locking the door behind them. As though nothing had happened. I replayed the footage twice. Not because I doubted what I had seen. Because I wanted to believe there was another explanation. There wasn't. That evening I called Daniel. Hi, Dad. Did you stop by today? A pause. Yeah. You didn't mention it. We were just checking on the house. I wasn't home. Exactly. I waited. He filled the silence. We wanted to make sure everything was okay. I looked at the paused video on my phone. Emily opening kitchen drawers. Daniel walking into my study. Checking on the house. No. checking through the house. I see, I said calmly. You aren't upset, are you? I'll talk to you soon. I ended the call before he could answer. Not because I was angry. Because I had heard everything I needed to hear. Trust had officially become evidence. And evidence doesn't argue. It simply exists. The following morning I visited Charles again. He watched the security footage without interrupting. When it finished, he removed his glasses. Did you give them permission to enter? No. Did they have a key you provided? I gave Daniel 1 year ago, emergencies only. Charles nodded. This wasn't an emergency. No. He closed the laptop. I think it's time. For what? To stop assuming this is only a misunderstanding. I remained quiet. He continued. I'm not saying your son is malicious. I know. But he has clearly convinced himself that your wishes are becoming optional. That sentence stayed with me. Your wishes are becoming optional. Not invisible. Optional. As though age had somehow reduced my right to decide. Charles handed me a fresh envelope. I'd like you to keep this somewhere safe. I looked down at it. What is it? The beginning of your final surprise. I slipped the envelope into my briefcase without opening it. Sometimes preparation doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like paperwork. But paperwork has a remarkable habit of speaking loudly when the right moment finally arrives. And that moment was now much closer than Daniel could possibly imagine. The envelope remained unopened on the passenger seat all the way home. Not because I was afraid of what it contained. Because I already trusted Charles. If he said it was time, then it was time. I placed the envelope inside the hidden metal document case in my workshop and locked it away. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat on the back porch and watched the birds. People often assume that preparing for conflict fills your days with anxiety. For me, it did the opposite. Preparation creates calm. Once you've accepted reality, you stop wasting energy wishing it were different. The next Sunday, Daniel called. Morning, Dad. Good morning. I was thinking. Go on. Why don't we have lunch together? I'd like that. At your place. Of course. He arrived just after noon. Alone. Emily wasn't with him. That immediately caught my attention. Daniel rarely came without her anymore. He carried a paper bag from my favorite bakery. I remembered those cinnamon rolls you like. Thank you. For a little while, everything felt almost normal. We ate lunch, talked about baseball, laughed about a fishing trip from 20 years earlier when he had accidentally dropped my tackle box into the lake. For a few precious minutes, I saw my son again. Not the man obsessed with plans. The boy who once believed I could fix anything. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Locked it quickly. Too quickly. Dad. There it was. Again. I've been thinking about something. I imagined you had. What happens if you fall one night? I get back up. And if you can't? I call for help. What if you can't reach the phone? I smiled. You've prepared this conversation very carefully. I'm serious. So am I. He leaned forward. I don't think you're taking your age seriously. I looked directly into his eyes. I've taken my age seriously every single day. He frowned. What does that mean? It means I exercise. I eat well. I see my doctor. I manage my finances. I maintain my homes. I prepare for emergencies. I paused. The question isn't whether I've accepted my age. He looked confused. It's whether you've accepted that I'm still capable. The words hung between us. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly changed the subject. 2 days later, Sophie knocked on my front door. She looked nervous. "Grandpa, come in." She sat at the kitchen table without saying a word. I waited. Eventually she whispered, "I think Dad's making a mistake." I poured her a glass of lemonade. "What happened?"